Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. We see the horrific images in the news and we read the heart-wrenching stories of families fleeing Ukraine to escape the war. Today, we catch up with Don Hutchens of Lincoln, Nebraska. Some of you probably recall Don from his days as executive director of the Nebraska Corn Board. Officially, Don is retired, but my goodness, he certainly is not just sitting back on his porch with a glass of iced tea. He's out there and he's traveling to various parts of the world, actually, on a lot of relief missions. And his most recent trip was to Poland and to help those that are displaced by the war that's taking place in Ukraine. Welcome, Don. It's great to have you with us today.
Great to be back with you.
So, Don, recently you returned from spending, I think it was 2 weeks in Warsaw, Poland, as part of a group called Operation Safe Harbor Ukraine. We want to talk about what you saw and what you experienced from, say, a food availability standpoint, some of the states of agriculture within the region. But first, tell us just a little bit about Operation Safe Harbor Ukraine. What is its mission, and how did you become involved in that?
You know, really, I looked at, I couldn't watch TV anymore or listen to the news or read about it without being more involved. I had traveled throughout Russia a number of different times from 1985 until about the time I retired. I'd been in Ukraine from Odessa to Kyiv. And so here under my nose in Lincoln, Nebraska, a man, Steve Glenn, who owns Executive Travel, had a personal desire to do something to help refugees. So when I contacted him right away, he said, block out April 23rd through May 6th. And he's working to host about 180 to 200 refugees in a hotel in Warsaw. And all donations, 100% of the donations go to supporting those refugees for housing, food, and other necessities like pharmacy medications. And so it was a great opportunity. Quite frankly, it was 12 hours a day on your feet, and very emotional, but very fulfilling. And this was primarily women and children that had fled all parts of Ukraine, from the Donbass, from Kyiv to Kharkiv to Odessa to Mariupol. And some of the stories of how they got out of the Ukraine, walking, buses, any kind of transportation with a rolling suitcase or a cardboard box, and what they could carry, and a child or two. So it was very rewarding. And like I said, it originated in Nebraska. There's a lot of efforts out there to support refugees, and I think any way we can do that, whether it's through your church or farm organization or any effort, it's very important for us to support those refugees that are now in a war zone.
So when you got there, when you arrived, what's the situation there, and is it what you expected it to be?
You know, I have to compliment Poland and Warsaw. During World War II, Poland really got it from all sides, from the Soviets and from the Germans. But Poland has opened up its country and the refugees to full health care, education, transportation, and citizenship, should they so desire. But remember, a lot of these women and children have left their husbands, their brothers, their uncles back in Ukraine to fight a war. And so a lot of them are going to want to return home at some point in time. But Warsaw, very welcoming. There's a trade center in Warsaw that's housing about 4,000 refugees. Churches, citizens in Warsaw and Poland are helping house refugees. I think there's approximately 3 million of the 5 million refugees that have fled Ukraine that are in Poland, and about 500,000 of those are in Warsaw alone. Quite frankly, we provided housing and, like I said, food. Every day I made a trip to the supermarket to buy fruit and pharmacy items and other necessities. but the World Central Kitchen provided an evening meal, and another food service provided the lunch. And in the hotel, breakfast was served there. So there's a lot of trauma with refugees, especially if you're coming out of the expo where there's 4,000 and they get into the Best Western Felix Hotel. Their tears shed because all of a sudden they have a shower, they have a toilet, they have clean sheets, thanks to Operation Safe Harbor Ukraine.
So that's a lot more mouths to feed for that area. Is there any kind of situation with food availability, or is that not as much of an issue? What is the supermarket shelves? What do they look like? Is there any concern there?
I've heard that question a lot, and frankly, I was very surprised the food availability in Warsaw. Fruits, vegetables, meat, grains. Warsaw is, as far as they use a currency called zlotys, and for zlotys to $1. And I thought food was very reasonably priced. Um, the availability was sure there for feeding the refugees. But add that many more people to a community, then you're going to have issues for the food gets to the right place.
What about language barrier? That had to be a challenge perhaps at times?
I don't know why they didn't have Google Translate 20, 30 years ago, but I communicated with a lot of kids, and they would tap my pocket, get your phone out, I want to talk to you. So 90%, 99% of the ladies and children that we worked with spoke Russian, and Google Translate works really well. It also works well for me when I go to a grocery store. If something worded in Polish, I could take my phone and camera and put it on the words, and it would translate into English. So new technology makes things so much better. And I would say there was probably, maybe 10%, maybe not quite, of some of the mothers and a few of the kids that.
At one point, you made your way to the border between the Ukraine and Poland. What was that like? I mean, were you apprehensive? What was your first feeling, your emotion? I mean, and there had to be a lot going through your head. I'm just curious about all of that.
I was more excited to get to the border than maybe I was the expo center, because being at the expo center where people are crammed in and very crowded, I didn't want to make people feel like I was there just looking at their difficult situation. But getting to the border allowed me about 3.5 hours of travel time within Poland to see standing wheat, spring wheat that had been planted, fields in preparation for corn and soybean planting. And then to the border, it was really shocking to me trying to get into Ukraine and the transportation trying to get out of Ukraine into Poland. So the vehicles waiting to get into Ukraine were citizens trying to get back to their home to work or fight or various reasons to go back, maybe living in another country away from your own. After 2 months, people wanted to go back home. But also a lot of transports of fuel, equipment, and vehicles. I was really surprised the number of vehicles trying to get back in on trailers being hauled back into Ukraine. But then when you stop and think how much damage has been done to vehicles and tax had been removed off of those vehicles. So the backup was about 2 to 3 miles long, 2 to 3 lanes wide, trying to get across the border where I was at. And the same thing existed on the Ukraine side, trying to get into the Polish. And World Central Kitchen was set up there. Another organization was also set up to provide food, water, kind of short-term medical needs. I saw some people walking across the border pulling a suitcase, some coming in cars, some in buses. Um, so it was a mixed bag, but it takes a visiting doctor that had gone from the States into Ukraine to deliver. Took her 22 hours to get across the border.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Do you have any sense on how they were doing over there in terms of Ukraine agriculture? I know we hear all kinds of stories about equipment being destroyed and bombs being in fields. Where you see, I mean, I don't know if you could see anything from where you were or hear anything or pick up on any updates on kind of where they might be in terms of, their planting operations and other things.
Difficult. I did visit with a farmer from the Odessa region that was in Poland with his family and getting ready to move to Tennessee. And he had commented that, obviously the ports are shut down, and that also while I was there, I could get Euro News on television, and there was a number of segments on the fact that the Russians were stealing grain and or damaging farm equipment, um, dropping bombs in fields and mining fields, which was very difficult, obviously to plant and harvest. So very, very challenging for a farmer in Ukraine to do what they're so very good at, because Ukraine is viewed as a breadbasket of the world, or not of the world, but for Europe, and they are the number one safflower producer, and so there was a lot of shortages of safflower oil product that was either being stolen or damaged, get that to the end market.
So, as a person in agriculture, I believe you still do some farming. I mean, Ukraine's somewhat of a competitor, right? I mean, how do you, when you're going over there, do you see that as a competitor? Do you see that, hey, these folks need help and we're here to help? Or how do you see agriculture responding to a country that does play a major role in the, supplying of grains?
Growing up on a small family farm, it was always important for neighbors working with neighbors. Maybe not so much as it is in this generation, but when you saw a neighbor in need, you went and helped, whether it was harvesting or if there was a storm damage, you were there to help. And every farmer is a competitor with another farmer, so to speak. And even you, as you look at Ukraine as being a competitor, I feel a humanitarian and moral obligation that we do what we can in agriculture to help those refugees. And because, like one farmer said, well, do you think the Ukrainian farmer would help us if we had a drought? Well, no. A drought is a little different than genocide or a war. And seeing a country like the Ukraine that is good at food production, so important to so many countries around the world, then I think I feel strongly that I want to help them agriculturally and help refugees, and that's why I went over to assist.
So a trip like this, Don, I mean, you have to come away with some real life-changing moments. What might those be for you? Did you have some kind of wow, this is going to always stick with me kind of moments that came out of this trip?
Yeah, I got to be careful not to let my emotions take. I spent a lot of time with young kids. One of my jobs was supporting ladies who were there that worked magnificently, helping convert our supply room into a virtual medical clinic. Get a lot of respiratory kinds of medicine to kids and mothers. So my job was a little bit of more heavy lifting of getting food delivered to the 8th floor at noon and evening, but also entertaining and taking care of a lot of young kids. The hallways in the hotel ended up as playgrounds, and I get very emotional when I talk about the young kids that I got to spend time and I'm still communicating with them. Even though I'm retired, I have a business card that says agricultural consultant and agricultural activist. And so I'm passing out my business cards to a lot of young kids. And just yesterday, I got a message from one of them that's moving on to an apartment now in Warsaw. So we'll stay in touch. But their fathers, their brothers are back in Ukraine fighting a war, and having, even though I'm over 70, maybe I'm more of a grandfather figure than a father figure. There was a lot of hugs and a lot of hanging on to each other. It's very emotional, a great experience.
Well, and who knows, they may someday, your paths may cross again.
I would hope so. If they ever make it to Nebraska, they got a home with me.
Oh, exactly. So, Don, thank you so much for joining us today. Don Hutchens of Lincoln, Nebraska. It's our pleasure to talk with you and to catch up with you. And thank you for doing great things out there. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Until next time, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.